Right, Deborah, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Daniel, and welcome everybody to this next session of our Supergen Net Zero Conference. We're going to wait a little bit for others to join. We've got a lot of people who have been in the previous session that we're hoping going to jump into this session now. So I will sort of introduce it slowly, and we hope the numbers will tick up as we go through. So welcome to this session of the Supergen Net Zero Conference, and this is organised across the Supergens. And this session is the international session, so it's all about the importance of international collaboration in sustainable energy, sustainable power generation and supply. My name is Deborah Greaves. I'm Professor of Ocean Engineering at the University of Plymouth, and I'm the Director for the Supergen in Offshore Renewable Energy. And in offshore renewable energy, we cover offshore wind, wave and tidal energy. And I'm delighted to be chairing this session today to explore the potential of collaboration internationally in this space. We've got a really interesting panel. We've got some great speakers here, and we're going to explore the potential. Well, we're going to look at some specific projects, some specific international collaborations, and also some models similar to Supergens in other countries, and look at and explore and discuss the opportunities and the challenges and the future opportunities in collaboration, the importance of that for our net zero ambitions, and in particular in the context of this year when the UK is hosting the COP26 conference in Glasgow. So I'd like to thank the organisers very much for the conference as a whole and for this session. So thanks to Daniel and Catriona and all the other organisers from the Supergens who have got together. I think it's really great that we've been able to do this across the Supergens and really look across the sustainable energy generation space. Okay, so as I say, the Supergens, we work together across all aspects of sustainable power generation and supply. We work together across many of those areas, and we have worked in collaboratively across our ECR support and other support and specific workshops and so on. But the role of the Supergens in the UK is to provide research leadership in each of these areas. And what we mean by that really is to connect together people and to inspire research to help accelerate the development of sustainable energy generation and supply. An important aspect of that is our collaboration within the UK, but very importantly, collaboration internationally. The issues that we're dealing with and the developments we need to see are going to have global impact, and we need to work together internationally and to be able to make progress with those. So we're going to hear from a number of people from around the world, and some of whom have got up very early to be with us this morning. So very grateful for your input today. Thank you for that. And I think we're going to hear some really interesting stories, as I say, about some specific collaborations internationally, but also about some frameworks and potential to grow that. Okay, so we have a number of speakers today, and I'll introduce the first one. What I'd like to invite the audience to do, as we have been for the other sessions, to please post your questions into the chat as you're hearing the talks. Please post your questions into the chat, and what we'll do is we'll take all of the questions together at the end. So we'll run through the presentations, we'll introduce the panel, and then we'll have a panel at the end where we can all go through the questions in the chat and ask those together. Okay. All right, so I'd like to start by introducing our first speaker. This is Dr. Timothy Silverman. He's a senior scientist at the US National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL. He does solar research and development and strategic analysis. His work is about photovoltaic modules and systems, including lab and field performance characterization, failure analysis and accelerated testing, computer simulation of field and accelerated degradation, and diagnostic imaging. He won the government's highest early career award, the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers, for uncovering the ways in which some shadows can damage solar panels. And his strategic analysis informs all aspects of the R&D portfolio of the US Department of Energy's Solar Energy Technologies Office. Okay, so over to you, Timothy. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that introduction. Thanks also to the organizers for inviting me to speak here today, and good morning or good afternoon to you, wherever you may be. So today I'm planning to speak for just a few minutes about my personal views about international collaboration, and then I'll share some details about projects I've done in collaboration with the UK. And to help you make an informed decision about whether to pay attention to this presentation, this is the last slide of the talk. I'm going to talk about why I think international collaboration is essential. I'll explain how avoiding it is the easy thing to do but carries risks, and I will encourage the use of measures of success other than money. And then I'll share some details about my collaborations with the UK in solar degradation science. So if this sounds interesting to you, then stick with me for 9 more minutes and you'll get the details. Now, I'm not the first to say that climate change and energy transition are global challenges, but it's important in this presentation because it isn't plausible. It is in fact unthinkable that we'll meet challenges using only local ideas. Certainly that we'll meet them in time using only local ideas. Now, there is a place for locking yourself into Woolsthorpe Manor pictured here and inventing calculus on your own independently. But this is a time where we have to combine that approach perhaps with working together across borders to get things done faster without so much independent work. The problem is that collaborating locally is what comes easiest. Local collaborators speak the same language, they're in the same time zone, maybe have the same funding agencies, and so it's just the simplest thing to do. But when we only collaborate locally, we risk hearing the same voices again and again, and if our voice becomes one of those voices, then we're in an echo chamber. And when we're in an echo chamber, when each of us is in our own echo chamber nationally, we're reinventing everything independently. We don't frankly have time for that, right? The urgency of this crisis is such that we need to work together so that we can share ideas and get things done faster. So this is why it's important to work across borders. And I want to encourage a broad definition of working across borders, a broad definition of collaboration. And I illustrate that using these 2 photos of meals that I had when I was living in England. On the left, an opulent university supper of some kind, and on the right, classic British picnic, where we brought together top minds to work out how to get the barbecue running and everyone fed, even though everything was wet. I'll remember both of these meals forever, and at both of them, I made strong connections with local experts in my field. And so I want to encourage that, yes, jointly funded projects are a good definition of a successful international collaboration, but just any kind of sharing of information, even between independent projects, even between projects that don't seem related, can be viewed as a successful international collaboration. I mean, how many times have you seen someone talking about an unrelated project, and you find they use a certain kind of adhesive tape to attach the samples, and I never thought to use this kind of tape, and it's changed the way research has gone. At least to me, it's happened maybe even twice, just with the tape example. And of course, after we're traveling again, just visiting facilities, meeting people, doing seminars is a good way to share ideas in the way that I've said is critical. And those are much easier to do, much easier to set up than jointly funded collaborations. And so with that broad definition of collaboration, I want to encourage the use of a broad definition of broad measures of success, not just money, but ideas exchange. That's the actual important thing. That's the actual currency of the realm, ideas exchange. It's hard to count them, so it can be better to measure the time spent exchanging ideas. So we have to make a special effort when we're not traveling to speak to each other, but on the other side, it's also cheaper and easier now to have a face-to-face meeting than it ever has been before. So we should try to spend more time exchanging ideas, and I welcome you to exchange ideas with me, and I hope you will with each other too. Of course, papers published and funding raised are legitimate measures of success, but they're measures of any success, not just international collaboration success. So they're there in smaller letters. Right. Well, I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to spend a year in the UK, and while I was there, I was able to be an academic visitor at Loughborough University, which is a part of the Super Solar Hub, which is a part of Supergen, which puts on this meeting. And so I wanted to share with you a couple of the most interesting projects that I undertook with CREST, the Renewable Energy Center at Loughborough University. They are to do with uncovering how cracked solar cells degrade and with making a tool to characterize emerging technology. But first, some background. Solar cells can be fragile. I'm not sure if you're able to see this video coming through, hopefully you are, but here's a solar cell that's falling onto a workbench and breaking into a million pieces. An easy solution, which is just package those solar cells into a rigid package that includes a piece of glass. That's the process you're seeing in this video. And to illustrate that that packaging holds those pieces of solar cell together, I'm going to use this technique called electroluminescence, where we can light up solar cells by applying power to them. So this is a solar panel that's glowing because we're applying power to it. And I'll have somebody walk across this solar panel. You'll see that cells inside the pieces are becoming disconnected, and that's why they look dark. And the module, nevertheless, is holding them together. When this guy walks off of this solar panel, it's working again. But the problem is that eventually those cracked solar cells can worsen in time, and it is a little mysterious why that happens. So when I arrived at Loughborough University, I brought this problem to them, and we worked together to come up with a whole bunch of new ideas on this topic. One thing we did is make a setup that allowed us to do this kind of imaging to a single cell in a solar panel that we had recovered from the field. So it had cracks in it from real life. And we watched the way that those cracks change with temperature. And that's what you're seeing in this video. And we learned that contact across cracks is intermittent. It changes depending on what temperature the module's at. This had not been seen before. We made another setup to measure the minute movements shown here on the left, fully magnified. These are the minute movements between broken fragments of solar cell that move around as the panel heats up and cools down. And you can see on the right side that disconnection that we were seeing earlier, also driven by temperature. This had not been measured before, but we did it together between NREL and Loughborough. We then took a tiny piece of one of these broken solar cells and put it into the microscope, the electron microscope. And we got this beautiful image. You can see a silver line running diagonally across the cell on a silicon background. And there's a crack through the silicon that goes right through that silver line. And this image had not been seen before until we collected it together. And we look closer and we see that this surface is able to make contact, but it is a very rough surface. And that rough surface can wear out over time. And now this series of pictures that hadn't been seen before has informed the mental model for how cracks worsen in time for our whole community. And when I come back, I decided that we need new ways of accelerating that rough contact becoming damage. And this is one of them. We've built a machine that can rapidly apply pressure to the back of the solar panel, move the pieces around inside and wear out the metallization. Let us predict the future of how these products will behave. And that machine is powered by a load of loudspeakers, just like at a noisy concert. When we use these microscopic insights to develop better tests, we can make better predictions and eventually make better products. These are very close to, these are commercial products that we're testing. And so when we make a new discovery, that applies to commercial products everywhere. So much for cracked solar cells. There's another project that's ongoing right now that's to do with this idea that PV researchers need to measure unusual solar powered items outdoors for long periods. So test articles, test modules. And that need is increasing. We need to put more and more of them outside because we've got more and more kinds of emerging technologies that need to be proven outdoors before they can be connected to the grid, supplying clean energy. The problem is that to put hundreds of them outside using commercial equipment, it's very expensive, it's hard to customize. People have reinvented in their echo chambers homemade equipment that's over specialized in ways. So I've personally witnessed it and reinvented probably 6 times. That's a tiny fraction of the times that it's actually been reinvented. And so this piece of equipment still isn't really easy to get. So we've tried to arrive at a solution at the university. We're building an open source solar electrical tool, and that's what's pictured on the left. It's versatile, it's customizable, it's low in cost, and working together to put it to the test. And when it's finished, anyone will be able to download the plans and produce these units without having to reinvent them from scratch, as has been done so many times. This is the last slide. You've already seen these, so I won't read them to you, and I'm almost at 10 minutes, but I want to point out, I want to thank all the people that I work with at Loughborough University. And I want to point out in this orange box that we're hiring a postdoc to work on perovskite PV reliability. And so be in touch if you're interested in that. So I'll conclude now, and thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Timothy. Thank you very much for that. Well done. And please do put your questions into the chat. Remember, we're going to take all the questions together at the end as a Q&A panel. But please, audience, do put your questions into the chat as we go through the talks. And thank you again, Timothy. So the next speaker I'd like to introduce is Dr. Richard Odoro, who's a research fellow at the University of Leeds on multi-vector energy networks. Richard is a research fellow at the university, and he's jointly appointed by the School of Earth and Environment and the School of Chemical and Process Engineering. He's working on the policy and society work package of the Supergen Energy Network Hubs project on multi-vector energy networks. Okay, Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Deborah.
Richard,
yes,
great.
So Deborah, I guess you can see the screen
yes,
now.
you can see your slides now. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present my experience and insights on international collaborations. I'm going to be speaking on the benefits and challenges, but also we'll do that through showing you some of the collaborations that Supergen Energy Networks has done, and then we'll dovetail that into a particular collaboration in Sub-Saharan Africa for Kenya and then Ghana. So I'll first talk about Supergen Energy Networks. What we do, we basically apply whole system approaches to energy networks research. And we are currently investigating various facets of multi-vector energy networks. Here we're looking at how networks can interdepend and interact among themselves, and then we can exploit or explore the opportunities that abound in terms of solving the challenges of networks, such as flexibility and then grid integration challenges. We have to partner and engage industry and the wider energy community locally, and we do that through our industry advisory committees. CERN has also a mandate to internationalize, basically to make global impact by engaging and collaborating with partners outside the UK. And this is where our talk would start from. CERN has done a lot of international collaborations, but I've got a few of them here. We have China collaborations where we're looking at flexibility and how we can use multi-energy systems to exploit that. We're looking at integrated energy systems in Netherlands collaborations. In Russia, we also did work on ICT and data and how it affects energy networks planning and modeling. But our current project that we're looking at, where I would like us to concentrate on, is the Sub-Saharan African collaborations, which involves Kenya and Ghana. So I want us to understand that there are different terrains. As long as you're going over the borders, you don't expect everything to be the same. So in terms of the UK and then Sub-Saharan African countries, they differ in many spheres. For example, in the energy sector, whereas the UK has minimal political involvement in the energy sector, the other countries have significant involvement in terms of political involvement. So the reason behind that could be the type of ownership that they have. Most of them are utility owned. Most of the utilities are state owned, and so they have some level of control. In terms of technical abilities and competence, in industry and research, obviously the UK has much more upper hand. Academic and industry collaborations, unfortunately, there isn't much in the Sub-Saharan African context. So we have a lot more academic and industry collaborations in the UK. funding is generally a challenge, but it's much more a challenge in these countries than the UK. So it's good for us to set these precedents so that at least we can understand the opportunities for complementarities and synergies. I'm going to talk about these collaborations that we have with Kenya and Ghana, but I'm not talking about them individually because they run on the same model. And it's basically a mirroring of what Supergen Energy Network is doing in the UK in these countries. However, it has some local content in it because they were discussed together with the parties or the partners. We started this idea because we have this mandate to internationalize. As part of our mandate to internationalize, we've been doing a lot with the other countries in the other continents, but we had done less of that in Africa, so we decided to concentrate on Africa at this point. So the opportunity came by when there was the need to do some collaborations in Africa. We then looked internally to see if we have the right resources to do that. Internally, we looked at the diverse community that we have, who are the people who have the right contacts, and then we could actually look outside as well to see if we can get some contacts. So we discussed the preliminary concept with these contacts, and then we were able to establish a meeting or a platform where we could synergize our ideas and interests. Eventually, we came to the drafting and signing of the MOU, which basically is the blueprint that we have to work with. There were some few challenges before we got to this point. I think I will highlight some of them in the end. So the partners involved in the Kenya and Ghana collaborations are Murang'a University of Technology, Strathmore University, Multimedia University, all of them under the Kenya Networks hub. And then we have two institutions, that's the Brew Hammond Energy Center from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, and the Regional Center for Energy and Environmental Sustainability from the University of Energy and Natural Resources. As you can see, these are quite energy-centric institutions. So we're trying to have the same model where we are open in terms of additional institutions coming in to contribute their bit so that we can actually expand this community. So that's the framework that we are working with. The objectives are actually split into two. We have the technical ones and the non-technical ones. So in terms of research, we are trying to go into network architectures and network modeling, whilst we are also looking at networks and climate adaptation. And then we're researching into energy networks policy, markets, and regulation. On the non-technical bit, we're trying to look into how we can promote early career researchers. So basically developing and engaging early career researchers. And since equality and diversity and inclusion is a problem, it's a global problem, I think all parties were interested to have some activities in this direction. And we're bringing on board the sort of expertise that we have in our own hub to bear. So far, we have engaged in a series of meetings and brainstorming sessions, basically to distill further the broad objectives to be able to get to specifics in order to carry on with the research activities, but also streamlining some administrative issues as well. As a result, we held a joint workshop with the Kenya group in June 2021. And basically what we did was for each partner to introduce and then expose us to their sort of energy sector and the sort of challenges that they have, so that we can actually get to the bottom of how we can synergize our capabilities to solve those problems. The next step really is to distill this further and then get to investigate the specific areas, but we need to prioritize them because we don't currently have a budget, and we're looking at how we can apply for some funding to be able to carry on with the project. So this particular project hasn't got a fund at the moment. The intention is that we're going to carry on bidding until we get some funds, but in the meantime, Supergen Energy Networks and some of the parties may have or could actually contribute to start up these some of the activities that are not really capital intensive. We're hoping that we can have an international conference in the UK or Ghana or Kenya when traveling allows us to do that and when we have the budget to do that. Hopefully it's going to be soon. I would just highlight the benefits and challenges of international collaborations based on my experience and also a collection of ideas from partners in Africa who are actually part of this collaboration. So, I mean, it is clear that when you have people or groups coming from different cultures with different skill sets, there is that diversity, and you can exploit that to solve common problems. We can enhance competencies of the various parties involved for a much more macro benefits in terms of social, economic, and environmental benefits. So, for example, if we're looking at SDGs, and we're looking at SDG number 7, if we are able to let research impact on efficiency and access to energy, obviously there should be a global benefit to all parties. And you can actually look at the implication on the welfare and the well-being of those countries. So if you're thinking about migration, for example, illegal migration in dangerous or in dangerous oceans, it's not something that people from Africa really want to do, but because of the economic circumstances. So if you can actually do this, you are actually impacting on the socio-economic as well as the environmental benefits. So developing countries typically would benefit from new technologies because they are quite, they don't have that know-how yet. And developed countries, collaborators would have the opportunity to try out their technologies. I think the last benefit that I'll talk about is the idea where it could be quite personal, you know, in terms of your achievement as an academic. So because we have diversity and peculiarities of these areas that we're collaborating with, there's a chance and the probability you get new areas of research that can benefit you in writing high impact factor papers. Even though sometimes people believe in the level of sophistication and think that there might not be some high level of sophistication to be able to be published in high journals, but then there are evidence that, you know, high impact factor papers have been published from collaborating with Africa, which are less sophisticated, which have less sophisticated energy systems. So this brings me to the challenges, my insights on the challenges. So again, cultural differences, different ways of doing things can be a bit frustrating. So typically you might encounter procurement problems because every country and its procurement laws. So an example is where a budget has been given to the local, to the African partner, and they can't access it freely because of those procurement hitches. Typically, there are ways where you can collaborate to go around it, and a typical case was where a partner actually asked the other partner to buy from Norway, and later on they could actually reimburse them. So there are ways you can go around those challenges as well. Now, building trusts and relationships typically require time. This is not unique to this the international collaborations. It's quite general, but I think it's pretty obvious why it is so. But over time, that establishment, that relationship builds up rightly, and so we should have that patience during collaborations. Funding has generally been a problem, and it could be worse now that we're looking at funding cuts. Typically, the developing countries don't have much enough funds to be able to do projects, and they rely solely on, most of the time, on donor agencies to be able to carry on some of these research. So if in the future, if this is not increased, but rather, you know, reduced, then it's going to affect the way we do research in some of these areas. I would like to conclude by having these takeaways that international collaborations are very important. Every collaboration will come with its own challenges, but then you can collaborate to actually solve those challenges or go around those challenges. There are opportunities for early career researchers and even established researchers, but it gives much opportunity for you to initiate and partake in some of these collaborations. And you get to learn a lot in terms of drafting of agreements and how to apply for funds. I have personally benefited from that, and I thank my hub very much for the opportunity they gave me. I would conclude by saying that we could be very deliberate and strategic about international collaboration so that we can get the best out of it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great talk and fascinating to hear about the challenges and benefits in initiating new international collaborations. So very, very interesting. Thank you for that. And please, audience, do take part in the chat and put some questions in for Richard, for Timothy, and for the other panel members. Okay, so our next speaker is Adam Fraser, who's a senior publisher with Elsevier. And he's a senior publisher for renewable and sustainable energy journals at Elsevier. And he publishes research to advance our understanding of clean and affordable energy for all in journals such as Renewable Energy and Solar Energy. So it'd be great to hear your perspective, Adam, on the benefits and challenges of international collaboration in this space and why it's so important to all of us. So over to you. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. Yeah, it's really great kind of following a couple of great presentations showing some great examples of international collaboration, and so I'll hopefully be able to talk a little bit more in a kind of like meta level as to what's kind of going on here. So yes, as said, my name's Adam Fraser. My main sort of day-to-day job is as senior publisher for renewable and sustainable energy journals. Other journals you may know, Biomass and Bioenergy, Renewable and Sustainable Energy Reviews, and really kind of working on the actual publication of their journals. But what I'm going to be talking today is a little bit of a side project that I personally have been contributing to, and that is around a report that Elsevier is doing around net zero. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about a bigger report that we're publishing called Pathways to Net Zero, the Impact of Clean Energy Research, but specifically today to talk about one small part of that in relation to the importance of international collaboration and research, as we've been talking about so far here. So really this report, it's in itself is an international collaboration. So for just those people that work at Elsevier, we have a research analytics department that do a lot of largely bibliometric analysis, but also we're looking at patent citations and so forth. It's our various product teams at Scopus and Scival and groups from Science Metrics all coming together. We've got a team from Montreal, Turkey, Amsterdam, UK, and more, and an advisory group as well, who may know some of those from all around the world. So the report that we're putting together from, and which you're seeing a snippet from today, is in itself an international collaboration, which is a thought that just came to me hearing about from those previous speakers. So really, as I say, this big report that we're doing is called Pathways to Net Zero, the Impact of Clean Energy Research. And this is a report that follows on from other topics that we've looked at to kind of look at some of the grand challenges and to kind of use the various resources that Elsevier has to look at detailed insights and understanding on cutting edge research and the societal impact of research. Now, previous reports have included the Gender in the Research Landscape report, AI, disaster science and sustainability, all of which are available online. And for this one, where we're going to be looking particularly at net zero and the impact of clean energy research, I mean, as we all know, climate change is the defining challenge of our era, or a defining challenge of our era. And we're looking at net zero and the aspects of this societal impact of the research. So it looks into a whole load of issues, but really today I'm just going to be taking one little bit from a chapter that we've done on international collaboration and global south and global north collaborations. So really, I mean, just take a step back and talk about the report more generally. Why are we looking at clean energy for net zero? As we know, the concept of reaching net zero is fundamentally based on two efforts: curbing emissions and removing carbon from the atmosphere. So when we talk about clean energy for net zero in the net zero report, we're not talking about specifically research on net zero, which largely looks at kind of modeling scenarios and so forth, but the wider picture is to do the research picture about clean energy getting us to net zero. So when we were trying to kind of look at, okay, what is the research that's going on in this area, and to try and capture that whole research in this very broad look of clean energy for net zero, we had to look at all publications that focused on different methods and technologies for removing emissions, removing carbon, and the behaviours in government, among other things. So really, when we're trying to put together this big publication set that we can then start to analyse this clean energy research as a pathway to net zero publication set, we used an existing mapping exercise that had been done by SciVal and Elsevier together, where we looked at each UN Sustainable Development Goal and looked at all the research that was going on there related to those particular goals and so forth. So this mapped all of them, but particularly here we borrowed from the SDG 7 mapped research and parts of the climate action research there. So when we pulled together this publication set, this totaled 1.6 million publications. And this isn't just Elsevier publications, this is pretty much every publisher that's catalogued, that's indexed in the Scopus system. So really, we pulled together this big 1.6 million publications and tried then to start analysing it and seeing what's going on in this space. And really, as well, as I say, we use SciVal and Scopus topic clusters to understand these research areas and look at the citation linkages between publications. So topics that we use, they're based on citation patterns and not, say, journal categories. So they're multidisciplinary and they reflect the reality of how research is actually conducted. Now, when you're looking at a report into net zero, you know, the temptation would be, okay, let's look at wind, let's look at hydrogen, let's look at smart energy and be really siloed about it. But we know that's not how research is conducted. And so by mapping these citation patterns, we had a more bottom-up approach rather than a kind of top-down approach. So that informs that whole report. Now, as I say, I'll go on now to talk about international collaboration and the collaboration a little bit later on between the Global South and the Global North. So when we look at this period between 2001 and today, we can see that over this period, the rate of international collaboration has more than doubled in this area of clean energy research. Some nations are performing better, and this chart that you can see here shows the percentage of international collaboration, particularly with the Global South nation, and the most high performing nation there was Saudi Arabia, followed by France, Portugal, Britain, Spain, and others. So we can see here that the general trend is that, you know, more international collaboration, some countries performing better than others. Now, it must be said, this is where there's co-authorship with somebody from another country, and particularly with co-authorship with somebody from the Global South. So now when we look into this in a bit more detail, basically all high output nations, high output research nations are increasing the percentage of international collaboration over this time period. And this chart here, you can see the light green line there indicates the global average share in 2001 to 2010, which is about 31%. And for 2011 to 2020, that global average has gone up to about 39%. And you can see there each nation, how they've performed from the light green earlier to the dark green later. Basically, everybody is going up with the exception of Russia, India, and Poland. And if we think about how much Russia and India are as emitters, the fact that their research collaboration is getting less international, that's perhaps a worrying sign there. But generally speaking, the trend is for greater collaboration. Now, to talk more specifically around the Global North collaboration with the Global South, to talk here about how we're defining Global South, you know, we are using the kind of standard definition of upper middle income countries and LMIC and LIC countries as defined by the World Bank. However, for the purposes of this report, we are excluding China from the Global South because of the significant position it has in research as a primary player. We felt that it wasn't quite suitable there. So to look more here, and this is going to be the next figure I'm showing here, around collaborations with the Global South. So as I said, when we talk about collaborations between Global South and Global North, that is where there is at least one author from a Global South country and one author from a Global North country on the same paper. And this chart here along the x-axis, that shows the percentage that that nation has published as a percentage with a collaboration with the Global South. And on the y-axis, there's a South focus. So i.e., has the Global South nation been a subject for that in terms of the field work or whatever in that? So really kind of, that, and put these two together here. And the grey line there shows the average for this research group. So of the European nations with high output, only the Netherlands was above average in collaborating with Global South nations and in focusing on the Global South in that research. Now, this is one of a few sort of perhaps warning lights on the dashboard here, is that the NWO, one of the main funders in the Netherlands, is changing their funding arrangements, where previously, if you had a collaboration with a Global South nation, that would be beneficial to you getting funding. That is going to change now, where that requirement is being removed. So perhaps we will see this drop down a bit, and the Netherlands will lose its preeminent place here. But to focus on some of the other nations in this, many other European nations, perform similarly well here in that cluster. Kind of a decent level of collaboration with the Global South, but less focus on fieldwork or solutions related to the Global South. So, we've spoken today about, are we making sure that the research is, kind of well calibrated to the local circumstance? And you can see here that not many nations are getting a high percentage of research with that particular focus. That said, the European nations generally tended to perform better than other kind of counterparts across the world. I mean, France is the last example from the Europe focus on here. It was the best performing European nation when collaborating with Global South researchers, but it tended to have less of a focus on the Global South in that research. And particular examples that they collaborated with were with Brazil and Thailand. I'll just talk actually one more point I wanted to make about the UK, and another warning in line with what I mentioned about the Netherlands. And Richard, you've mentioned already about UK funding cuts. The UK is performing relatively well here, but the Global Grand Challenges Fund, which was used in the UK to build research collaborations with the Global South, as I'm sure many of the people on this call will know, that was funded from the UK Government Overseas Development Fund, but late last year this budget was cut. Now, forthcoming UK spending review could restore that, but we would expect potentially the Britain's position here to fall back, and it has managed to establish strong collaborations with other high output nations such as Malaysia and Brazil in this time, but a bit of a warning there for the future, and that progress may go backwards in the next decade. Now, looking more globally, you can see here the USA and Canada and a lot of East Asian nations here performed less well overall, behind on both collaborations with the Global South and with focus on the South in that research. So really just kind of discuss a few points here that I think have raised from just this small snippet of our report. As we enter the SDG decade of action, is international collaboration increasing as fast as we need? We are seeing an increase, but is that getting us there as fast as we would like? And to think from a European perspective, will European nations learn from the success of others, perhaps the Netherlands, or risk taking a step back from the international community? And we've seen nations like Russia, Poland, and India doing that in this particular circumstance. But really, the kind of wider question as well is that how can we make sure that research is conducted in and about the Global South so that solutions and impact are properly attuned to these nations, and that we avoid the potential pitfalls of believing a slightly imperialist idea that we can simply export research from the Global North and expect that it would make sense in that circumstance. So, as I say, the full report is coming soon. It will be published online to coincide with the Times Higher Education Climate Impact Forum on the 28th of October. The data set is going to be freely available for research purposes and through SciVal subscribers. And as I mentioned from some of those previous reports that we've done on gender and AI and so forth, you can find those in the Research Intelligence resource library we have. And of course, I'd be happy to answer any other questions that you may have. So a thank you to everybody from my side who was involved in this report and putting it together. You know, this is just a small snippet of it. I'm sure there's plenty more interesting results to come. And thank you to everybody here for inviting me along.
Okay, and thank you very much indeed, Adam. That's a really fascinating report that's going to come out there. We look forward to that, and interesting to see how the international collaboration in research has increased and how that's sort of distributed around different countries. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Let's move on to the next presentation now. The next speaker, who's Farah Courtney, and she's the Principal Strategic Advisor to the Partnership for Offshore Wind Energy Research, the Power US. And Farah manages an independent consultancy in public policy, research frameworks and strategic partnership building, including as Principal Strategic Advisor to the Power US. She was the founding executive director of the US Offshore Wind Collaborative, applying extensive experience in ocean policy and clean energy market building to stewarding the transition to a low carbon economy. So over to you, Farah, and I think Kirsty is sharing the slides. Yeah, brilliant, thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah, and thank you, Kirsty, for taking the technology out of my hands. Full disclosure, I'm not an academic, I'm not a scientist, and I'm not a researcher. So therefore, I handed over the technology to somebody else to manage for me. I need to say that I'm really happy to be here and feel privileged. I hold the research community actually in awe. The work that's done, the intellectual capital that's being invested in tackling the big global problems of the moment. And I feel really privileged to have a hand in supporting those efforts. As Deborah said, I have an independent consultancy. My focus is in public policy, market development, and strategic partnerships in support of the U.S. offshore wind industry. And my interest has always been in tackling the big enabling issues around building a sustainable industry that's going to have global impact, and looking at those cross-cutting issues that are needed to support an industrial scale development as opposed to the development of a specific project or a specific technology. What we need to do to go big and to do it right, in other words. In around 2016, I got involved with a group called the Massachusetts Research Partnership in Offshore Wind. This is a group of 6 universities in Massachusetts that were doing world-class work in a variety of areas that touch on offshore wind, from ocean management, ocean science, atmospheric sciences, civil engineering, and more. These groups got together as the industry was growing in Massachusetts. The offshore wind industry was starting to take root. And the question that they were putting before themselves was, how can we better mobilize our intellectual resources to support the growth of this industry and the positioning of Massachusetts as a leader in this new industry in the States. We were fortunate enough to get some funding for specifically for collaboration, not for research projects, but to allow this group to have the space, the principal investigators, to have the space to get together and have some discussions along these lines. My role with this group was to connect the institutions and their research interests to the industry needs that I was observing, having worked in the industry for around 10 years, and also to the government policy drivers and the lack of government policy drivers in our case, and to help put the research needs into those particular contexts. So this is always the approach of this research partnership was from the beginning not only multidisciplinary, but also multi-sectoral, trying to make those connections between the different sectors that needed to come together to move the industry forward. So I served as an independent convener and a connection to the needs of the industry. One of the first things we did was look with great envy across the pond to learn what was happening in the countries with an active industry. We sent a mission to the UK and met with some of the leaders, including Supergen, the Marine Data Exchange at the Crown Estate, and of course the ORE Catapult, to see how they were organizing industry collaborations, data, and thinking about testing facilities and where the needs for those kinds of testing facilities were going to go. So it was a great trip. We had the opportunity to really create some solid interest in conversations moving forward, and that's where it all started. So I want to talk a little bit about the evolution of the Massachusetts Research Partnership into the Partnership for Offshore Wind Energy Research in the US, which is a national conversation, and a couple of specific projects and ways that those early relationships with the UK have served this industry and this initiative. Can I have the next slide, please? So as this group of institutions in Massachusetts started having its own conversation, we quickly realized that based on the connections we already had to other researchers across the country with related interests, with complementary interests, and the potential scale and impact of the offshore wind industry, we needed to grow this into a national conversation. And we were very fortunate, again, that the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, which provided some of that support for collaboration, was comfortable with the idea of us moving the focus beyond Massachusetts and bringing in researchers from around the country. And that was really important and unusual because our competitive impulses among the states and among institutions often don't support that kind of open-mindedness. In addition, one of the specific institutions involved, Tufts University, specifically funded a series of workshops and again allowed that Tufts to be at the table with a group of universities providing funding that was supporting something that was bringing people together. So we convened a series of working sessions and we invited our new partners from the UK, from the Catapult, from Supergen to be an active part of these conversations and help us understand where we should be moving in this process. In fact, we early on had an opportunity to bid on the management of a national research consortium through DOE funding. We were not successful in that competition. However, the process of having the conversations with our partners around the country, thinking about what US assets we could bring to the table and how we could bring this process together resulted in this white paper on what a national framework for wind energy research might look like. And we actually invited the ORE Catapult to be an active member of that competitive team, and they contributed significantly to the thinking in this paper. Also, you'll definitely see influence by the model of the Supergen in this paper and the collaborative multidisciplinary approach taken there, but with a flavor of the specific assets and challenges in the US. And so I need to mention at this point that the Partnership for Offshore Wind Energy Research US is a concept. It doesn't have funding behind it. It doesn't have infrastructure behind it, but it's something that we are informally driving forward and are hoping to see happen at some point. Now, for a couple of the unique aspects that we saw, things that the US could put on the table in this collaborative research approach in offshore wind. Can I have the third slide, please? So based on the expertise and the experience within our group, we realized that we have really significant experience in at large scale testing assets for civil infrastructure, and the ability to interconnect these assets through cyber infrastructure. And we looked at models in the US, including the National Earthquake Engineering Supergrid, and the processes that went into place to connect these significant testing facilities. And it occurred to us that we also are involved in global assets that are really important in the offshore wind space, like the International Ocean Observing System. And these are not, looking at the testing infrastructure, we clearly can't repeat these kinds of investments in every country. And we need to be looking at how we can leverage and better use the assets that are, the specific assets that are available in various countries to bring to the table to move forward the offshore wind industry. So that was our thought. Next slide, please. So we looked at what a potential NEAS infrastructure might look like for offshore wind. Again, starting with US assets, we realized we have facilities that are have been developed specifically for offshore wind. We also have assets that were developed for other purposes, but could be deployed in the offshore wind space. And we envision a network of these testing facilities that can be interconnected with researchers around the country working collaboratively on projects, and potentially internationally as well. Can I have the next slide, please? So one tangible outcome of this conversation and a specific collaboration between Power US participating institutions in the US and the UK is a program that's just started that's taking advantage of our first offshore wind installation at Block Island and the UK's, the ORE Catapult's Leavenworth installation, looking at optimal sensor placement for physics-based digital twins. This program is just getting underway. It's jointly funded on the US side by the Department of the Interior and on the UK side by Innovate UK. And you can see the range of institutions that are involved here. Next slide, please. So we're looking forward to the outcomes of this project that's going to be incorporating both forward modeling and inverse modeling and the concept of virtual sensors to really optimize the digital twin concept in the offshore wind space. Can I have the next slide, please? So this, we discussed the concept of bringing together US and UK assets, the need for opportunities for funding, for actual collaboration, understanding that collaboration is a function. It's separate from research. It supports good research, but we really need to think about ways to actually fund the type of interactions and the development of trusted relationships. And I go back to the Timothy Silverman's first slide about the academic convening and the importance of that, but also those opportunities to develop personal relationships and problem solving around the barbecue. We need to think of ways to continue those interactions. One thing I want to mention too that's just getting underway is a conversation that's been initiated again by Power US through Tufts University, talking with researchers in the UK, the US, Denmark, and Norway about the issue of data sharing and data accessibility and the development of global benchmark data sets that we can use to support innovation in offshore wind, which is an industry of potential global impact. We started a discussion that will result in a white paper that will be published hopefully by the end of this year that can be used to promote to policymakers the funding and consideration of additional global collaboration around these issues. So just a couple of other takeaways from my experience here and what I've learned about how the academic enterprise works and its relationship to the governmental and industry enterprises that I'm embedded in. We all like collaboration, but funding systems and the competitive structures in academia and government typically don't support it very well. So we have to do something about that. As I said, collaboration is a specific function that requires investment apart from research and funding, and we need to think about that collaboration in terms of multidisciplinary collaboration among research institutions, international collaboration in the research sector, and also relationship building and collaboration between academic institutions, government, and policymakers. And this is particularly important for the other component of the academic enterprise, which is training and preparing the next generation of researchers to understand the context, the global context in which their work will be applied. And finally, it's true that research needs to be independent, and that's the value of the research sector. And the reason that the research sector coming together globally to make a statement about something like the need for better data can be very impactful. But I would also say that research institutions need to be in the development of research programs, particularly in areas of energy, particularly in areas of the importance of decarbonization, need to be informed by the policy and business needs and responsive to these needs in order to really move forward on the goals and objectives that we all share. So with that, I'll close. I'll just note that I did include a link to our convergence, research convergence report on this slide, and I look forward to the conversation.
Okay, thank you very much, Farah. That's a really great presentation. And you certainly have been fundamental or instrumental in bringing together people across across industry and research within the US and with our groups within the UK as well. So it's been great working with you. Let's move on now to our next speaker, and it is Carrie Noonan is going to join us now, and she is the Technology Project Officer for the US Department of Energy, and working in particular in the energy efficiency and renewable energy as a technical project officer and responsible in the energy efficiency and conservation block grant and for the water power technologies office. And I think talking about some frameworks in the US similar to what we do with our Supergens here in the UK. So over to you, Carrie. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me show the slides. Can you hear me?
Yep, and we can see the slides fine, so perfect. Please go ahead.
I'm doing a time check. Are we doing okay on time?
We are running a little bit late, so
good to know.
We're okay.
Right. I will try to keep this to a minimum. Anyway, I am part of the Water Technology Office out of Golden, Colorado, working with our DC counterparts. I have been there for 4 years, but with the Department of Energy for over 11. Previous to that, I worked with the infamous PG&E in energy conservation, Hewlett-Packard on a lot of different collaborations where I worked in Europe for 6 years, lived in Europe, and it really did help me understand the perspective of how important collaboration is. I'm going to talk about some of our current engagements today and why we think it's so important, the so what, the benefits. And I'll suggest some other opportunities, but I really am looking to get these opportunities, ideas from you too. Overall, DOE really believes that the path forward is really through cooperation and collaboration, both internally and externally with our international partners. Now, that being said, we actually have both our regulations, ESA, and our congressional language supporting that. I think Tim was the one that talked about time being of essence, and it's true. The biggest challenge and another reason for collaboration is we have lack of time and lack of resources. The good news is that last year, Marine Energy, so Water Power Technology Office is split into two, hydro and then marine energy. I'm going to be talking about marine energy today. And last year, our budget was about 109 million. And again, it's not final, but there's a range being spoken of between 100 and about 140. So it looks pretty good for the Wave Technology Office. So here's where I'll spend a lot of my time. These are where we are engaging today internationally, but specifically with the UK. Some of the formal ones are the OES, where we have delegates. We're working on some projects, both the environmental and performance metrics, and we're leading an effort in aquaculture. I think that some of the growth is that we get more involved. Again, time and resources are one of those areas that unfortunately prevent that. We are involved in the standards committee, and we have several people on that working on committees, doing workshops, contributing to reports. That's really critical for us because I know that we are pushing standards and the requirement in a lot of our funding that they use these standards. Again, more consistent standards allows for no duplication of efforts, more consistency of approach. It's a really strong benefit for the whole community. Funding mechanisms. I think the last speaker talked about how funding is critical, and we have different funding mechanisms, and we've been trying out different funding mechanisms. FOAs are probably our bigger ones, funding opportunity announcements. We have more flexible, smaller award prizes, SBIRs, all those different mechanisms, but so what in these? There are a lot of examples of how we have funded opportunities where the UK has gotten involved. Let me give you an example. PacWave is our testing facility in the West Coast. EMEC helps us on that. It's been helping us shape that area. It's also been helping with the newest Atlanta Marine Energy Center that was funded last year. So it's helping us again develop guidelines and accreditation. So that's been really helpful. EMEC's been very important in that area. Another area is, and I bring in Supergen here, is our last FOA, we actually had for the first time, an organization similar to Supergen, and I actually reached out to Deborah to help me actually develop the FOA and then help afterwards. I mean, that was really critical in trying to figure out what we wanted in this organization. And I'll talk about UMERC later, but I think I just wanted to give kudos to Deborah in helping us not only develop the specifications, but also in actually afterwards and growing that. Same thing, we wanted that leadership in research, inspiration, connect our university research network, and also grow that. So I'll talk more about that later. So this is an area of funding mechanism where we have money for UK industry and academia to apply for these applications, apply for FOAs and prizes, whether it be as a prime or a sub. It depends on the rules of that specific FOA. But I encourage you to make sure you get involved in those because we have several ones with that have EDUM. We've got a couple activities where we're working with the University of Edinburgh, and so you'll hear that through our water wires. I keep pushing that. I will be pushing that throughout. Subscribe to that so you'll get to know all of the funding opportunities. And again, depending on the way we structure those, there are opportunities for international funding and partnerships there, which help tremendously in the projects that we're funding. TEAMR was set up about 2 years ago. It's the testing expertise and access for marine energy research. So that's where you can go to get expertise on numerical modeling or tank testing, flume testing, and in the future, hopefully later on in the field testing. But we've actually And what you do is people apply to get free help. It's free. And we actually support the organization that is providing the expertise. It doesn't go directly to the applicant. But 3 UK partners have actually been given funding. Orbital Marine was one of those, ECOS was another, and then University of College Cork. So already we have 3, definitely an opportunity to grow right here is more applications from the UK to use our resources. Because, you know, even though we're providing resources, there's a benefit to both of us in both, you know, information sharing, new perspective, and just basically consistency of approach. I think a lot of us have mentioned the informal way of going to conferences, ICOE, and these workshops like this. I'll push one of my workshops later, but I think those are really important areas to build those network of people that you can in the future collaborate with. UMERC, I just mentioned that's our newest project that has come from the last BOA I did. We took the input from Supergen. It's not quite the same. We don't provide funding with UMERC, but we do want to grow our network. We want to inspire and connect. So it's similar, and also I'll talk about that in the next slide here. You're the first to see the new UMERC icon or logo. One of the things I want to push is that we do have an international partner, University of Edinburgh, helping us out, giving us advice, helping us with lessons learned, and trying to really put together an organization that will be successful. Currently, it's focused on US research community, but there will be workshops and an opportunity for the UK and internationally to come to those workshops to do information sharing. So I do encourage that. I foresee, and this is just my personal opinion, that UMERC could grow in the future to have that more of an international perspective. But right now, we're really focused on making sure we grow and inspire, as Deborah said, our university research network. I wanted to kind of summarize every one of those engagements that we've done, the engagements with funding, like funding opportunity announcements or FOAs, Teamer, even with our work with OES and with UMERC, it's all about information sharing, having consistencies of approach, leveraging efforts because time is valuable, and just greater knowledge for our stakeholders. Because our ultimate goal is to accelerate marine energy commercialization. And the only way I see that happening is really through better and greater collaboration. I talked a lot about the engagements, and here are some opportunities. Obviously, with OES, we can get more involved in different committees and different projects. Obviously, the same thing with the technical committees. But I think the big opportunity for some of the research community and also industry in the UK is really getting involved in some of the funding opportunities. And the way to do that is through water wires and really making sure you're on the network there, because there's a lot of funding there to get that cross collaboration. The same thing with our Teamer network. UK can apply. UK applicants are able to apply, which is not always the case with our funding. And again, I wanted to talk just a little bit about Push the Marine Energy Materials Workshop coming up October 5th. One of the things I've done is I've reached out to international speakers, UK and in Europe, to bring their research to this workshop so they can help us in developing our material strategy. Anyway, this is the final slide because I know we're out of time. Teamer network is one of those really important ones. If you want to apply to the Teamer applications, every couple months we have these requests for technical applications. The UMERC network is just being developed. Their website will be up in a couple months. So if you have any questions, definitely go talk to the that email right there. And if you have any questions, you can also contact me. But more importantly, I think the way to keep the engagement and grow our engagement for maximizing our benefits is to subscribe to Water Wires, get involved, and as much as possible, build those relationships informally and obviously formally. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Carrie. It's a really good overview of all of the work going on there, and some really great pointers for things that we can collaborate in as well, and opportunities for UK academia. So thank you very much for that. Right, we're moving on to our final speaker for this session. We are running a little bit late, but we've got time for the next speaker and then for a few questions, I hope, for the panel. So I'd like to introduce Miriam Roeder, who is Associate Professorial Research Fellow at the Energy and Bioprojects Research Institute, EBRI, at Aston University. So Miriam, I think I will hand straight over to you now to give your presentation, please.
Thank you, Deborah. And I try to keep it brief because I know people want to ask questions. So my name is Miriam Roeder. I'm from Aston University, and people who have been with us all day, they will have heard me speaking before. I'm also leading the topic group systems in the Supergen Bioenergy Hub. But now I want to talk about modern bioenergy solutions in low and middle income countries. And I think I have the same problem as before. My slides are not moving. Give me 1 second. Are they still there and moving?
Yes, they're moving now.
Perfect. Okay, excellent. Thank you. So why is bioenergy in low and middle income countries so important? Obviously, we face in these countries still big challenges around energy access to electricity, to clean cooking, but also to transport. And bioenergy is actually the key of renewable energy form in these countries, not just in the global south. I would say across the world, bioenergy is the dominating renewable energy source. But for the global south, biomass is often used in an unsustainable and inefficient way with quite significant impacts on the environment and health. So there's this urgent need to transition from traditional, inefficient, unsustainable biomass use to modern bioenergy solutions. And maybe I pick up now a bit on what Adam said earlier, that there's a lot of research in collaboration with the Global South, but not so much focusing actually on solutions for the Global South. And I will come in a moment to a few examples of research projects we did in the Global South, actually particularly focusing on solutions for the Global South. So the Global South, bioenergy there is not just the key energy form, but there is also this large potential of underutilized biomass, in particular residues. And so bioenergy can offer often actually an easy solution. I say easy, it's not as easy as I say, but it can offer a great solution to provide energy services to meet the minimum living standards of communities. But novel bioenergy approaches also can enhance the bioenergy potential, but they also can drive innovation in these countries which have a high biomass potential. And the versatility and dispatchability of bioenergy offers us this opportunity to not just supply energy, but also meet the energy demand. So really bringing these two sides together, understanding how and what form is energy needed and what can bioenergy offer. And that makes bioenergy, I would say, quite sexy because it gives us all these different opportunities. But also, as I said this morning already, bioenergy delivers benefits beyond energy and emission reductions because especially in the global south with many agricultural based economies, there's this close link between different sectors. So with agriculture, with forestry, with waste management, and in that case, bioenergy not just delivers energy, but it actually can support livelihoods beyond energy access. So I want to really quickly introduce a few examples on the work we're doing in the Global South. And I didn't do it intentionally, but actually managed to cover the three different global regions. So this is work we're doing in the Philippines, and I think I've seen Craig, who's the mastermind behind this project, in the participant list. So this project started a long time ago around actually a waste problem that rice straw is currently burned in many rice growing countries because the farmers just need to get rid of it to get the next crop in. So there are really big issues around air pollution, unsustainable disposal of rice straw. And over years, we have looked into opportunities how this can be used. And biogas seemed to be a good option. But obviously, this would just be a technology intervention. But what we really wanted to achieve with that project is to find community-based solutions, which include the community telling us what they actually need and what services are helpful for them. And that wouldn't just focus around producing a biogas and producing energy and improving energy access, but actually also finding agricultural solutions for the farmers to help them to manage the straw more sustainably, but also bringing in different business models, allowing the farming communities different levels and different opportunities of engagement to diversify their activities. So the key message around this project really is that the community participation, and I want to take collaborations further than us talking about academia with industry, but actually academia and industry with communities, with society is really key, because that allows us to understand where do our ideas, innovations, investments actually make most sense for communities and for the society. Another project we worked on was together with Stellenbosch University in South Africa, looking into mango waste biorefinery. And to keep it really short, what we did in this project that was done by a PhD student was trying to understand what the economic viability and the environmental impact of mango waste biorefineries is. You find often studies looking into one aspect or the other, but you need to, in bioenergy, you need to take the whole picture, because cost is one thing, and usually these interventions are more expensive than other renewables, but you also get the environmental benefits. And with that work, we really wanted to understand how can a biorefinery look like, and what is economically feasible, and how can you reduce emissions or minimize emissions. And what shows it quite nicely, just to point out, so we had looked at 3 scenarios, and scenario 3 is the one which is economically most viable, but scenario 3 is also the ones with the highest emission impact. So when you look at one aspect and you might want to have the best economic model, that might not create the best environmental impact. So really understanding these linkages between different aspects is really important. And you might need to go for the middle solutions, which brings good environmental savings, but also some revenue. Or if you, for example, focus really strongly on greenhouse gas emission reduction, you might go for the option, which is scenario 1, with the lowest global warming impact, but that might also be the least economic, and then that might need policy, industry support to actually get that working. Another example of work we did in the Global South is looking into the use of coffee stems in Colombia. That again was a PhD project. And what I want to show here is we looked at different scenarios to produce bioenergy, bioelectricity, combined heat and power. But we also looked into what does it replace? What is the counterfactual? What is the context we use it in? And here you see a graph with lots of numbers and different colors. Green means you achieve an environmental benefit. The more orange it gets, you actually have an environmental risk. And what it showed us was that you always get a mixed bag. You might be good in terms of greenhouse gas savings or emission reductions, but you might then have other adverse negative impacts on other environmental impact categories. So really understanding the linkages that you might not be able to go for the highest emission saving scenario because it might have negative impacts on other aspects, and how does it actually affect then communities or the environment. It's really important to understand these balances and trade-offs within a system. This is some work, and people who have been in the session this morning, I flagged that up as well, which is done by Rob Holland in University of Southampton, looking into biodiversity, because we talk about net zero, but as I said, bioenergy or whatever we do is related to something else. We all live in a system. We're not just living in a kind of like a small bubble. And he looked into the impacts of biodiversity from the electricity sector, understanding on what impact it has beyond borders, and showing that what we do actually in developed economies might have a much bigger impact and overseas areas compared to their own territorial area. And that, I think, it's a really important message, that the UK, for example, might say, okay, we do something and we go net zero, but it might have an adverse impact somewhere else. And understanding these linkages is really important. And I have shown that this morning as well for everyone who hasn't been there, and it's a new graph in there as well. So this is the bioenergy sustainability indicator model we have developed in the topic group systems in the Supergen Bioenergy Hub, which allows us to map system sustainability across all aspects of sustainability. So around society, around environment, around the economy. And Andrew Welfel, who is the mastermind behind this model, has also implemented a nice tool in this model to actually understand how a bioenergy system relates to the Sustainable Development Goals. And often, if we talk renewable energy, the focus around Sustainable Development Goals is SDG 7, which is energy, and SDG 13, which is climate action. But as you can see here from the graph and all these errors, bioenergy can offer so much more. And understanding these interfaces and linkages is really important, because you might have benefits in one area you're not paying attention to because you think like, oh, it's not energy and it's not climate action. And it's really important that we understand the wider sustainability aspects to enable these less visible benefits. And this also actually showed in a special issue we did earlier this year around bioenergy development in the Global South, where we had contributions from lots of different countries. And we tried to understand what is research, and it links a bit to what Adam showed earlier, what is research actually focusing on? And it wasn't surprising to see that most of the research focuses on SDG 7, SDG 12 as well, because we looked into modern bioenergy approaches, so around sustainable production, SDG 13. And there were other sustainability or SDGs which weren't addressed. And quite interestingly, what a lot of people forget, that actually partnerships and collaborations is in Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 17. And so understanding the bigger map or the bigger system of sustainability is really important, because that allows us to understand also the less obvious, less visible aspects, which are important to actually enable non-monetary social benefits. So just to really wrap up, and I will not go through all of this because I just said most of it, but I think it's really important to take the systems view and to include also communities, have community participation to really understand what is relevant for the people, what do people need. And if we see communities have unsustainable practices, what is then needed to actually get them to change? So that is quite key, not just going in there and say like, do this, but really understand the demand, but also the need to help them to achieve change. And collaboration just offers so many opportunities more than just doing net zero, but actually brings wider benefit to reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, that's from me. That's the people working with me through the different projects, which definitely need to be mentioned.
Okay, thank you very much, Miriam. And I think those sentiments at the end there really bring things together really well for the whole session. But I have been given the go-ahead from the organisers that if people are able to stay for another 10 minutes or so, then we can take a couple of questions. So please do stay if you can. And I'd like to invite all of the speakers that are in the panel to turn on your cameras, please, so we can take some of the questions that have come into the chat. And I'd also like to invite Professor Robert Steinberger Wilkins, who's Professor in Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Research at the University of Birmingham, who's also going to join us on the panel. So thank you very much. And many apologies that we've run a little bit over time, but I think those presentations were really so fascinating and so broad-ranging across the international collaborations that we have. It was very, very well worth listening to them in full. So I'd like to invite the audience to put questions into the chat. We have had a couple of questions that have come in, and two of them are quite related, really, though I noticed that Patricia unfortunately has had to go to another meeting, but Patricia Thornley's put in a question about funding. Whether or not international collaboration is adequately funded, and are there better mechanisms needed in order to promote the collaborations across a range of overseas partners. And also, of course, has European funding historically skewed things? What does that mean for the future? And we've also heard in the presentations a little bit about, for the UK, some of the GCRF funding and the international funding has changed. So what does that mean for the future of our research in international collaborations? And I'd like to sort of bring that question together with the question from Vahid, who's asking about what institutional arrangements we can bring in to promote R&D joint ventures and collaboration in green power. So I'm not asking everybody on the panel to answer every of those questions, but if you could just give your thoughts, particularly on the funding question and on the institutional collaboration, or what sort of ventures should we promote, that would be really helpful. Please do try to add something that hasn't already been mentioned by one of the other panel members if you can, and then we'll have a really interesting discussion. So I'm going to start with Robert, seeing as he's just joined us. So Robert, would you like to take that one first?
Yeah, okay, so that's the revenge for not having had a presentation. Right, yeah, what I'd like, well, let's say the GCRF funding essentially was foreign aid in disguise, sort of subsidizing British universities. So essentially, it's not really, it hasn't helped the foreign partners much. I mean, we could funnel money to foreign partners, but it's been very difficult to get projects in those funded in there, although the funding was quite generous if you look at the whole programs. The main problem is this: if we have cooperation with other universities, like Birmingham to somebody else, or to other institutions or even countries, the money involved there is very, very small, small funds, and it covers travel costs, but it doesn't cover much more. So you can't really perform research on that, and that is really holding us back. So we do get money for internationalization within the university, but it's enough to get to know people, but it doesn't actually get us working, because it requires us to apply for other funding. Our main income as a group, of course, is European. As you might guess, there's been a lot of a flurry of calls recently from Innovate, but that all has to be industry-led. Very difficult to get in as a university, and we haven't been very successful. Only have a few projects there. So as the EU has this very distinct hydrogen and fuel cell strategy, of course, there's a huge program there we can luckily still, or fortunately still, can tap into. And I mean, you just hop onto a train in London and you're in Paris. If it's not just COVID times, you're in Paris in 2 hours, in Brussels 2 hours, 3 hours to Amsterdam, 4.5 or whatever to Cologne. So it's much easier, like Timothy said, to actually get to people and interact with them, and not having to travel for a week, but just for a day or so, or 2 days. So that is really key, getting in touch with people. I mean, having all these web conferences is good. It does save a lot of time and travel time, but at some point you do really have to get to know people and have to go to supper with them and all these things. And the big thing we've lost, of course, is Erasmus, which is a real bugger. And the touring program is just not making up for it. We haven't seen the regulations yet, how they want to allocate the money, but it's very clearly not making up for that. So all in all, currently the situation for international cooperation is not improving in the UK. It's rather, the chances are rather dwindling away. And then, of course, we are told to talk to other institutions directly, bilaterally, but that doesn't make up because, as I said, there's just not the funds to support this. I think I'll leave it at that before I get more negative.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Yes, let's see if we can have a more upbeat response with some suggestions for how we might overcome some of the changes that we have all faced over the last few years on the funding landscape, but I suppose also the opportunity we've had through connecting digitally more easily. I'm going to go to Timothy now, if that's okay. Do you want to? I'll sort of go round in the order that we spoke, just to give everyone a bit of warning.
All right.
Okay.
I get a bit more warning than Robert, I guess. Yeah, I guess I'll have to speak generally. I think that talking about specific funding mechanisms in the US won't be that helpful for this audience. But yeah, so okay, the issues that I've encountered and the basis for my advice to keep an open mind about non-funding definitions of successful collaboration is that setting up a collaboration one by one is a huge undertaking and seems to waste a lot of time. There's a lot of friction because what happens is that legal people and political people have to become involved so that everything is above board and fully approved and everything. And doing this one by one for each interaction is extremely expensive. It's simply easier just to get independent funding and work together by phone or by visiting or whatever. So if I were offering advice for how to improve that situation, it would be to set things up where things are pre-approved, where contracts don't have to be negotiated for a year before they're executed, where politicians don't have to be reconvinced of the value of something. So if these things are set up in advance, and they can make things easier. And perhaps you all are already better at doing that as members of the European community, in a manner of speaking. But yeah, we have a ways to go in the US. I was excited to hear that Carrie Carrie and I are very close together geographically, but not very close together. We do not work at the same place or even on the same things. But I was excited to hear that Carrie's part of the organization has found a way to have funding opportunities with international hooks built in. And maybe we'll talk later about how it was achieved. It's something that I thought impossible. So having things pre-arranged like that is one way to improve this. But I'd go back to what I said in the talk, which is that, gosh, it can be so discouraging to try to work through those issues. And it's much more encouraging to just forget about the exchange of money. I know it comes from a position of privilege if everyone is able to get independent funding. Not everyone is, but if they are, we can just try to forget about all this paperwork and try to work together and remember our common goals.
Yeah, that sounds very good. And let's get rid of some of that bureaucracy.
And the barbecues.
Yeah. So, and Richard, you've got experience of setting up a new collaboration. What's your sort of view on how things work and what we need to do better or more of?
Okay, I think I would comment on the funding bit as well. The issue here is not that the developing countries don't have some sort of funding, but maybe the way in which they're being discharged or they're being given out. So, for example, they have research allowances, which obviously is given to almost every academic or research, but these are done in quantities that are really small and can't do anything substantial. Whereas in the UK, maybe you have a pool of funds where you can compete for, and in terms of competencies and efficiency, we kind of know that that's going to come up because people are going to compete for the funds, and it ends up getting some projects that are quite relevant and important. So I think that we can also collaborate on that front. How can we take that experience we have in the UK to help set up such funds in these countries or guide them in these countries? And these conversations should be had at the top level, at the political level, at the top level, so it can really have an impact on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we're going to have to sort of whiz around the rest of the panel, if you don't mind, because we need to start the new session, which starts at 3 o'clock, and we want to give people a bit of a break. So just a very short view on your sort of key messages on this question. So let's go to Adam next.
Yeah, so as somebody who is a little bit negative in my presentation, I think you know, as Robert, you know, identified some of the problems, but one of the, when we look more detail around the UK and the collaborations with funders elsewhere, Brazil and Malaysia, different funders kind of supplying. So perhaps the positive message here is that if one funding stream does come offline, perhaps there is a wider cultural sort of basis which can see out some of the kind of bumpiness in individual funding streams coming off and online, and that hopefully those establishments are in place and will see us through perhaps a more testing time.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Adam. And Farah?
Well, speaking briefly, very specifically about the US and even more specifically about offshore wind, which has a number of unique aspects to it. You know, we're in a whole new world now. We've struggled for 15 years without the kind of policy drivers that have been in place in other countries. We've seen the industry develop and be established and being a going concern in the EU and now in Asia. And we're really in catch-up mode. But the good news is we have now policy-backed, clear, big ambitions, and we have the market mechanisms also in place in the States. So we're really looking at new opportunities for funding streams in a variety of ways to support science and research. And because the development of our industry was preceded by all this international work in the research community and the establishment of the industry elsewhere, we're pushing for, the community of academics and researchers that I work with are pushing for that opening up for partnerships and new structures for collaboration. So we want to see it happen. We will have new resources. Stay tuned.
Okay, that's really great. I am going to have to bring the session to a close now. I'm really sorry. But I think I would like to make sure we've got time to say a huge thank you to all of you speakers who've joined us today and given your time today. I'm sorry that we've run out of time for more questions, but it was really fascinating to hear your presentations and covered a broad range of projects and ideas for collaboration. So thank you very much for your time, and please do take a little break and join us for the next session if you're available, which starts at 3 o'clock or whatever time you're on, but in just under 15 minutes. And that session is going to be about collaboration with industry. So thank you again very much, everybody, and thank you to the organisers and to the audience for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.